He had $400,000 on the table. 3 separate deals. Any one of them could have changed his life. He spent 11 weeks thinking. By week 12, all 3 were gone. Here's the part that should scare you. He was the most prepared person in the room. He had the spreadsheets, the research, the advisors. And he still lost. Not to someone smarter, not to someone luckier. He lost to himself. What he discovered 6 months later changed everything. And it has nothing to do with confidence, risk tolerance, or trusting your gut. The wealthy don't decide faster. They decide from a completely different place. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what that place is. James wasn't reckless. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't underprepared. He was the guy who built a marketing agency from nothing. 1 client at a time, starting at 28 with just a laptop and a favor. By 34, 9-person team, real revenue. A client list that took 6 years to earn. But every time a big decision arrived, he froze. Not dramatically, not visibly. He froze quietly, inside the gap between knowing everything and still not feeling ready to move. He had a name for it. He never said it out loud. He called it waiting until it's clear. The problem? It was never fully clear. There was always one more question, one more variable, one more reason that right now wasn't quite the right moment. And so, 3 deals in 1 year, all researched perfectly, all lost to the same invisible enemy. He added up the cost one Thursday afternoon. He stopped before he finished. Then, he called a man he hadn't spoken to in almost a year. What that man told him is something no business school will ever teach you, and it starts with a question most people never think to ask. They met at a private club in Atlanta, warm lighting. Quiet conversations. Arthur Blake was already there, gray suit, silver hair, no phone on the table. He stood when James arrived, genuine, unhurried. They sat down. James ordered coffee. 30 seconds of silence. Then, James said, "I lost 3 deals this year, not because the deals were bad, because I couldn't decide." Arthur nodded. James said, "I had more information than anyone, more analysis, more preparation, and it still didn't help." Arthur picked up his glass. Arthur said, "It never does." James said, "What do you mean?" Arthur said, "More information doesn't fix a decision. Problem. It usually makes it worse, because the problem was never information. The problem was architecture." James leaned forward. Arthur said, "The wealthy don't decide faster, James. They decide differently, and I'm going to show you exactly how." Arthur said, "Let me ask you something. When you were looking at those 3 deals, what were you waiting to feel?" James said, "Certain." Arthur said, "You never would have, because certainty doesn't come before a good decision. It comes after. You had the sequence backwards, and most people spend their entire careers that way. Think about a decision you're sitting on right now, a partnership, a job offer, a business move. Are you waiting to feel certain? Because here's what wealthy people know that most people don't. Certainty is not a condition for deciding. It's a reward for having decided. And the sooner you understand that, the sooner you stop leaking money to your own hesitation." Arthur said, "Here's the first thing wealthy people do that almost nobody else does. Before they touch any analysis at all, they ask one question. Is this decision reversible? If you walk through this door and hate what you find, can you walk back out? If yes, you decide fast. You accept you might be wrong. You move. If no, you slow down. You go deep. Most people treat every decision like it's permanent. They agonize over things they could undo in 60 days, as if it were a tattoo on their face, and they lose. Every time. The last deal you hesitated on, was it actually reversible? Could you have walked it back if things went wrong? Because if the answer is yes, and it usually is, then what you called being careful was actually something else. I'll name it in a moment." Arthur said, "The second thing is what I call the survival test. Forget what's the risk. Forget what's the reward. Ask only this. What is the worst realistic outcome, and can I survive it? If yes, decide. If no, walk away. No upside changes that. That's it. That's the whole test. One question, 30 seconds. Most decisions made. Right now, pick a decision you've been delaying. Ask the survival test. Worst realistic outcome. Realistic, not catastrophic fantasy. Can you survive it? If yes, you already have your answer. You've had it for weeks, Arthur said. The third framework is the one people resist the most, because it requires honesty. I call it the cost of doing nothing. Most people calculate what could go wrong if they act. Almost nobody calculates what it costs to stay still. But inaction isn't free. The partnership you didn't take had a price. The contract you over-negotiated had a price. The investor round that closed without you had a price. You just couldn't see it the way you see a visible loss. Wealthy people have trained themselves, usually through painful experience, to see both costs equally. And when you do that, decisions that felt impossible become obvious, Arthur said. And the last thing. This is the hardest one to hear. Wealthy people decide with less information than you think. Not because they're reckless, because they've learned that beyond a certain point, more research doesn't improve the decision. It just makes the person feel better about delaying it. There is a threshold, a point where you have enough to decide soundly. Past that threshold, every extra hour of research is not diligence. It's fear wearing the costume of preparation. That phrase, write it down, because it's probably describing something you did last month and it cost you. James didn't leave that conversation with a decision made. He left with a card. 4 questions. Small handwriting, taped inside his desk drawer. Question 1. Is this reversible? Question 2. Can I survive the worst realistic outcome? Question 3. What does it cost me to not decide? Question 4. Do I have enough to decide? Or just enough to feel comfortable? 2 weeks later, a former client came back, bigger scope, longer term. Higher fee. Old James would have studied it for 2 weeks. New James opened the drawer. Reversible? Yes. Survive worst case? Yes. Cost of not deciding? Real. This client came back to him specifically. Enough information? Yes. He responded that afternoon. Signed. By Friday. 48 hours. 3 months later, a licensing deal, new territory, real complexity. He ran the 4 questions, negotiated for 8 days, not 8 weeks. 8 days. He signed a deal worth more than the 3 he had lost, combined. He was not certain when he signed. He was never certain, but he had stopped waiting for a feeling that was never going to arrive on schedule. 18 months later, James's agency grew 60%, not because smarter deals appeared, not because the market changed, because he stopped losing to himself. He still felt uncertainty before every big move. The difference was, he now recognized what that feeling actually was. Not wisdom, not diligence, fear, wearing the costume of preparation. Think about the last decision you delayed. Not one you made badly. The one you never made. Now ask the 4 questions. Was it reversible? Could you survive the worst realistic outcome? What did not deciding actually cost you? Did you need more information or more comfort? Because the gap between where you are and where you want to be is almost never a gap in intelligence. It's almost never a gap in opportunity. It's almost always a gap in decision architecture. The wealthy aren't moving faster. They're moving from a completely different place. And unlike talent, unlike luck, unlike timing, that place is something you can build. Arthur's last words to James, the ones he wrote on the back of the card. The cost of a wrong decision you can reverse is almost always lower than the cost of a right decision you never made. If this made you think about a decision you're currently sitting on, that's exactly why this channel exists. Every week we go deeper into why some people build real wealth and why equally smart, equally prepared people never do. Subscribe, because next week's story might be the one that finally moves you.